ሬዲዮ መረብ ኤፍኤም 105.8 ኦስሎ ኦፒኒየን ርኢቶ እይታ
You're listening to Radio Merab on FM 105.8 Oslo. Your host Girmay with a weekly commentary on the current events in Ethiopia. Well, the civil war in Ethiopia is creating great instability in the region and could undermine American economic interests and destabilize its area of influence. Major General William Zana, commander of the United States Combined Joint Task Force for the Horn of Africa, gave an interview to the BBC stating that American troops stationed in Djibouti are ready to intervene in Ethiopia to resolve the crisis. What's happening in Ethiopia is closely linked to the rest of the region. The decision to withdraw Ethiopian soldiers from Somalia compromises the military capacity of the other 5 African countries that make up AMISOM in the fight against Al-Shabaab and Islamic terrorism. Now, these terrorist organizations can regain ground, containing border tensions between Sudan and Ethiopia and risk sparking a war between the two countries. Worse still, foreign powers could exploit the weakness of the Ethiopian government to carry out an important political or military intervention. General Zana affirms with clear reference to regional and international antagonists, Turkey, Iran, Russia, and China. Well, when asked by the BBC journalist what role American armed forces could play in the Ethiopian crisis, General Zana specifies that the mandate of the Combined Joint Task Force for the Horn of Africa provides for military interventions in the region if America's interests are seriously threatened. We're ready to take action to ensure the evacuation of our diplomatic staff, our citizens, and citizens of other countries should the situation deteriorate. Well, various regional experts have interpreted these statements as a direct message to Abiy Ahmed and the Amhara nationalist leadership of the risk of a United States military intervention aimed at speeding up the process of regime change, using, of course, the excuse of protecting Western citizens. Diplomatic sources, of course, again warned that at the United States force base in Djibouti, all licenses have been revoked and placing them that states that the force as such is on maximum alert. The United States force in the Horn of Africa was established in response to the events of 9/11, as far as we remember. The mission began as the Maritime Expeditionary Mission aboard the United States Mount Whitney, the ship, flagship, during 2002. And this force in the Horn of Africa is relocated ashore and established its base at Camp Lemonnier in Djibouti in 2003. Well, under the command of, it's called African Command, United States. In 2013, following the attack on the embassy in Benghazi in Libya, this force was tasked with helping the State Department during the emergency crisis. The Combined Joint Task Force of the Horn of Africa is made up, of course, of various military corps, service branches, along with foreign armed service personnel from various allied and partner nations. The force had the mandate to use all available means to strengthen security in the Horn of African region, defend United States national interests, and, of course, promote regional stability and prosperity. The State Department recently accepted Tigray government leadership of the TPLF and the Oromo leadership of the Oromo Liberation Army for the resignation of Premier Abiy as a precondition for truce and talks. Diplomatic sources in a personal capacity inform that the United States has convinced the Tigrayan government and Oromo Liberation Army to accept a compromise that provides for the resignation of Abiy and his exile in a foreign country. American efforts to reach a political solution and end the Ethiopian massacre are not bearing the hope for results. The Amhara fascist regime sees the United States as direct enemies and calls for Pan-African resistance, like to the Yankees go home, appealing to all African countries for help and support and to prevent the United States from, on quotation, colonizing Ethiopia, which I find it very funny. The supporters of this Amhara elite regime and Eritreans in the West, in the United States, in Europe, of course, the Eritreans are mostly ex-soldiers they are now in the West disguised as refugees and still support the government, the raw government in Eritrea led by Isaias Afwerki. The Amharans and the Eritreans who support the government in Eritrea demonstrating against the United States, in the United States, against the United States, and of course against the democratic forces of TDF and Oromo Liberation Army. Of no importance are the diplomatic affairs of the African Union, as far as my knowledge is concerned. It's totally unsuitable, that can we see, but Obasanjo was in Mekelle, he was in Addis repeatedly in Tigray. Then we can also think about the European Union. The European Union in the European crisis is highlighting its internal weakness. And there are journalists that say this internal weakness of the European Union is caused by a lack of cohesion of foreign policy among the member states in Europe. They are divided in the consideration that support for American doctrine for Ethiopia that represents European interests in the regime or not. Some say it represents our interests, some say not. Some European states are even engaging in opaque and double-cross maneuvering. Among them is Italy, which still winks at Abiy Ahmed and still is strengthening political and economic ties with the Eritrean dictator Isaias Afwerki, who is being targeted by the United States as such. Now, the United States Department is also noting an unwillingness to support a political solution on the part of the fascist Amhara regime, which identified the talks as a kind of abdication. And the latest semi-official proposal of the Prosperity Party is that what they want is a simple ceasefire and the possibility of granting independence. Tigray can go, while the current political framework that places the Amhara leadership at the helm of the country remains unchanged. An unacceptable proposal that tends to identify the TPLF or the Tigrayan government as the source of problems, while on the other hand, it's the whole of Ethiopia that's fighting against the Prosperity Party regime now. But any possibility of a truce and the start of talks was definitely now compromised with the atrocious air raid of Mekelle, the capital city of Tigray, which took place on the night of November 20. Getachew Reda, spokesperson and executive committee member of TPLF, tweeted, "The dying regime in Addis Ababa conducted a drone attack in a residential area in Mekelle around 1 a.m. in the night. It's become an unmistakable pattern for Abiy to target residential quarters in Tigray whenever his forces are dealt a harsh blow in the battlefield." Yeah, that's what Getachew said. I say it was indeed butchery of civilians that has no impact on the ongoing military operations to stop the advance towards Addis Ababa of the TDF and the Oromo Liberation Army. And there are also 7 other coalition regime armies that are now beginning, whether they are small groups or not, that doesn't matter. But the fact is that everybody, many nations in Ethiopia are against Prosperity Party regime. Now the question is, would the United States examine the expediency of moving to a higher level in supporting the democratic forces fighting the regime? Maybe yes, maybe no. But I think the Amhara elite regime leaders are repeatedly heard saying that the United States provides intelligence support, satellite communication, and even they say that the United States gives logistical support to the TPLF and the Oromo Liberation Army, which, of course, I don't think this has happened. But that can be their lame excuse for the shameful defeat they are facing in the battlefield. Of course, the Biden administration is focused on avoiding a scenario of ethnic war after the fall of the Amhara regime, which at present seems inevitable. The State Department intends at all costs to prevent post-Abiy Ethiopia from following the fate of Somalia in 1991, after the fall of dictator Ziad Barre, a scenario that will see the continuation of the civil war between the various ethnic groups and attempts at independence by the various regimes that currently make up Ethiopia. Yeah, the United States is, of course, focusing on the unity of the country and a coalition government that knows how to strengthen federalism and the ethnic interests of every single Ethiopian regime. It remains to be seen if that is what the Tigrayans, who are victims of a year plus long of genocide, would want that, but that's what America wants. But the birth of the political and military alliance between TPLF, TDF, and Oromo Liberation Army, and the 7 other regional armies that gave birth to the United Front of Ethiopian Federalists and Confederalist Forces, can set up to create a government, a coalition after the fall of Premier Abiy. That can guarantee the only feasible cooperation to reach where maybe the United States wants. But what I'm saying here is, if Pentagon and the White House are serious, they would have studied by now best military option there is if the peace efforts fail. 3 options in the field. They can make direct American intervention, maybe blue helmets, or intervention by allied regional forces such as including Egypt. Yeah, the first option seems to prevail, in my opinion. According to the diplomatic sources, Biden is planning an attack on the Ethiopian regime from the Camp Lemonnier base in Djibouti. Well, if we buy that, then it's a good step. But if Pentagon is serious and want to stop the Amhara elite regime and the rogue Eritrean government to create Armageddon in the Horn of Africa, it must intervene as soon as possible. Intervention in airstrike, I would say, to neutralize what remains of the Ethiopian air force, the various Iranian, Chinese, and Turkish drones, neutralize them, neutralize the columns of the militiamen who are still fighting the democratic forces, air raids on all military airports, including Debre Zeit, which is near Addis Ababa, ammunition depots, remote drone piloting command posts. Finished. Then the air raids would serve to wipe out the last resistance and allow the democratic forces to liberate Addis Ababa, overthrowing very easily the Amhara fascist regime before thousands perish. That's the only possibility to save thousands from dying. Thousands have died and thousands are dying now. Now, Djibouti Foreign Minister Mahmoud Ali Yusuf said the United States will not be allowed to strike Ethiopia from its military base inside the country. Well, Djibouti appreciates its strategic partnership with the United States, but this partnership is not geared towards any country, said Minister Yusuf. Well, that's a pathetic statement that poses no practical problem for that matter. The government of Djibouti has no de facto sovereignty to put forward as a valid argument. The small country that survives thanks to port activities and the presence of a foreign base, in fact, are protectorate of France and the United States. Its power to oppose an eventual American decision to use the Djiboutian base to launch airstrikes in Ethiopia are practically nil, zero. The plan to personally influence regime change in Ethiopia was preceded by a series of political and military actions in neighboring countries in order to secure favorable ground. Last week, Washington imposed new sanctions on the Eritrean army, and the leaders of the Eritrean regime warning it is ready to act should Eritrea decide to restore its direct military support in defense of the fascist Amhara regime. But that's what Eritrea is doing now. These are not threats, but they were warnings from the United States. The question now is, will USA do this in practice? The Biden administration is, of course, determined that Ethiopia remains under the Western sphere of influence. And that is, it doesn't want Ethiopia not lost to China, Iran, Russia, and Turkey. So recent diplomatic visits to allies on the Arabian Peninsula have been aimed maybe at supporting the initiative. Delicate negotiations were underway between the United States and the United Arab Emirates, who supported Isaias Afwerki and Abiy Ahmed in the course of Tigray genocide. But now the United States and the United Arab Emirates have agreed to stop Emirates' support for the regime. Since the beginning of the conflict, there were 124 flights of Ethiopian Airlines made from Abu Dhabi to Addis Ababa for the transport of weapons, ammunition destined for the Federal Army and the pro-regime militias. Last Tuesday, the United States Department again urged United States citizens in Ethiopia to leave the country immediately. The Biden administration has also announced that it is ready to pay the cost of purchasing airline tickets in the event that some American citizens do not have the necessary funds to leave. That's a clear sign that the Pentagon doesn't want to have its citizens in Ethiopia before launching airstrikes, maybe, in order not to run the risk of being transformed into hostages or human shields when the war comes to a point where sat in the capital city. So the United States Federal Aviation Authority has issued a statement advising all American citizens not to travel to Ethiopia or to buy air tickets for other African destinations that include a stopover at the International Bole Airport in Addis Ababa, or that fly over the Ethiopian airspace. That the American war machine is ready to unleash hell on what remains of the regime of the Nobel Prize peace winner. That could have been, a dream. I don't think this will be practical, but that's what one journalist, Italian journalist, said. He said the American war machine is ready to unleash hell on what remains of the regime of the Nobel Peace Prize the prime minister, who wanted to become an emperor of Ethiopia. Only the official pretext is missing, says the journalist. Next week, the Congress will discuss whether or not genocide against the ethnic Tigrayans have taken place in Ethiopia or not. Well, if genocide is recognized next week, the United States will have more than enough moral cover to intervene. Well, says the journalist, but we hope that this will be practical in terms of when we see it as Radio Merab, as to how many lives will be saved if this is practical. But most Tigrayans have the belief that the solution is TDF.
Yes, Tigray Defense Force. The gallant fighters of Tigray that the star and activist Eden Gebrselassie calls Goblel in her newly released single.
تادون عردن ولدن ولادن عود كاقدن يقدن ننيا 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 يبال سكنتي أقول قال كايوم مدرى فاسستي غيرو محنتي أعطي خحمس دفاع عمدنس رست خامس قبل لي كل تخوانو قبير كايم من دي خسخا قبلين كبرنا عخا تدميرهم كقنسوها قبلين حمد الحسكا قبير كايم من دي خسخا قبلين كبرنا عخا تدميرهم كقنسوها እንዳሳደደት ከደት ረአይ ውርደት ጎብለሌ ኸደ እንዳሳደደ እንዳሳደደት ከደት ረአይ ውርደት ጎብለሌ ኸደ እንዳሳደደ
Thank you, Eden. By the way, Eden and her husband are distinguished, celebrated Tigrian artists and activists. In fact, her husband is now a member of the TDF. Thank you for listening and watching.